Hello, friends. It's nice to see everybody here. My name is Monty Paulson. I lead the Passive House team at RDH Building Science, and I'm really happy to see you all. It is my privilege to welcome you to the Passive House Happy Hour hosted by Passive House Accelerator. This is an inclusive gathering. We welcome people from all Passive House communities. We welcome people interested in electrification and reducing embodied carbon in buildings. And we welcome anyone else who's working on a way to accelerate the transformation of our built environment in order to survive the years to come. So please turn on your cameras. We want to see you. Please turn on your microphones just for a minute. We want to make a toast together. Raise a glass or a cup of coffee, depending on where you are. Peer out and toast with me to operable exterior shading, the low-calorie air conditioning substitute.
Hello.
So you're going to see some great shades on the building we're going to show tonight. So please mute your mics, close your email app, put down your phone. We have a great video from Collective Carpentry about a panelized passive house going together. And we have a fascinating presentation about an elegant infill mid-rise small suite passive house building in Seattle. Exactly the kind of small lot project that could pull us out of both a depression and a housing crisis. So I want to add too that I hope some of you are watching the International Passive House Conference online this morning. Among other things, we learned that PHI is working with the European Union to prepare a faster and cheaper method of deep energy retrofits. We're going to get Jan Steger to tell us more about that a few weeks down the road once he's had a chance to recover from the conference. But this project is called, wait for it, Outfit. Get it? There'll be more presentations tomorrow morning at morning Pacific time, including some great presentations on high-rise passive house projects around the world. And then the two final days of the conference are next Wednesday and Thursday. So we're about the halfway point. The conference also has this cool social meeting tool where you can move your avatar around the bar and like go sit at that table and go sit at that table and crash different conversations. It's surprisingly fun. Maybe we'll try something like that here someday. My co-host Prudence is taking a well-deserved day off. So to introduce tonight's short video, please let me turn it back over to Sean Moore.
Good evening, everyone. Glad to kick off this video by Collective Carpentry. They're doing a system in Montana. So Zach, why don't you turn it on?
Hi, this is Rain. We're in Bozeman, Montana, putting together a near passive house. The builder is Eason Builders. I'm from Collective Carpentry. These are walls that were built in our shop up in Invermere, and we're putting them together. We've been here on site for about 4 days. This is our fifth day on site. We're going to install roof panels today and some upper walls, and then tidy this thing up and get out of here. There. Okay. Good. Okay. Yeah, go ahead and keep pressure on it. It's gonna get progressive. Okay. We started out the day by putting in 3 giant roof panels on the main floor. We then kind of transitioned into some air sealing and then some structural work in order for us to move upstairs. On the upstairs, we installed 9 wall panels, and then we moved into the structure that supports the roof, which is a big glulam beam, and then we installed 6 roof panels on top of that. The assembly that we were working with today were mostly roof panels, and that's really just comprised of a really deep I-joist. It's a 24-inch deep I-joist filled with dense packed cellulose. We have airtight OSB on the inside and a layer of wood fiber board on the outside and a really nice Proclima membrane on the outside. That forms our weather tightness and a redundant air tightness layer. Let's go and take a look inside. You can kind of see what we accomplished today. So like I said earlier, we started out today by setting 3 really large roof panels. Some of the biggest ones we've ever made. They're 12 feet wide, 2 feet deep, about 24 feet long, and weighed almost 6,000 pounds. That is due to the mass of cellulose inside of them. we transition to this area here, which transitions to the upper area, which is a bedroom up there. We set the wall panels and roof panels on top of that. We really like using as much natural materials as we can, especially a nice carbon sequestering material like wood. So really the majority of this building is wood based.
Nice.
All right, everybody. Again, you can see this project went up last week. They shot that video like on Friday, sent us the footage, put it together. So if you want your projects featured, just get some footage and just show us all, the 5 Pascal's principles. We want your videos. Monty, over to you.
Zach, actually.
Yeah, we're going to go into breakout rooms. So these are going to be 3 minutes long. This is a chance to do some rapid fire introductions. So introduce yourself and make sure you get around the group in 3 minutes. See you in a bit. I want to remind folks that every week we publish this Pass-Faust Weekend Preview on the Pass-Faust Accelerator website. Here's the homepage, and there's the preview. And you can get information about the upcoming happy hour. We just released our episode 6 of the Pass-Faust podcast with Simone Schenkel. This is an interview by Matthew Cutler-Welsh, our co-host. And it's a great interview, so you want to check that out, and please subscribe to the podcast. As you've heard, the International Pass-Faust Conference is ongoing. If you haven't registered yet, it's not too late, because you can get access to all of their content via video. Speaking of video, we just had our Pass-Faust Component Spotlight with Zola Windows, and they shared UPVC window options for multifamily and budget buildings. So there are lots of great options to learn about and information to dive into on that video.
And they have Silent Bob as a spokesman.
Yeah, we thank you for bringing that up. We had some Zoom adventures with tough internet access, but Florian covered quite well, and Evan was very gracious. And we have a number of fall conferences happening that you can see and link to there, and also the ongoing socials, of course, and some great educational resources, including the pattern language from Pass-Faust that Monty teaches. So please check it out. And with that, I think it's time for me to hand it off.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Zach. It just amazes me. It amazes me. You know, it was only a decade ago that one had to wait months and months and months to get a few days of Pass-Faust training somewhere. And now you could just stay home in your jammies and drink from a fire hose of Pass-Faust education. So if you've been attending these calls a few weeks, you've probably figured out by now that Pass-Faust Happy Hour is a bit like the island of misfit toys. And tonight we have 2 of our most glorious misfits to show us a wonderful little building. Sloan Ritchie is a pioneer in the Pass-Faust movement in Seattle. He's a founder and president of Cascade Built. In addition to the project you're about to see, he's built his own passive house. He's working on Solus, a Capitol Hill project we saw several weeks ago here. And he's working on Seattle's largest project, a 66-unit building at 320 Queen Anne. Brandon Nicholson runs Nicholson Kowalczyk Architects based in Pittsburgh, which focuses primarily on larger Pass-Faust projects. NK is leading a really interesting multifamily Pass-Faust project near Washington, D.C., and we're going to kind of rope brand and come back and talk about that in a year. He's also a founder of a Nicholson, a development and asset management group. Both of these guys own and operate some of the buildings they built. And Brandon's a former board member of NAPHN of Pass-Faust Western Pennsylvania. He was hugely responsible for bringing the NAPHN conference to Pittsburgh a few years. Remember when conferences were an excuse to go to a cool city and see new things and actually have beer with people? Maybe we'll get to do that again soon. Both of these guys have been real inspirations to many of us in the Pacific Northwest for many years, and it is my distinct honor to welcome them to present on a wonderful little building. Take it away, guys.
Well, I guess first off, I'm incredibly glad to be able to present to the happy hour. Kudos to all of you who founded it. When I first started joining, one of the first in early April, it was just quite a change up from, you know, the early COVID days, and to all of a sudden be able to reconnect with people that you only see at these conferences that we don't get to attend anymore. It's been quite a pleasure to just attend, even if I don't actually have to present. So background, Sloan, we've been working together. I mean, we originally were working on almost like townhouse code in Seattle like a decade ago. I'll let Sloan at least pipe up and say an introduction, even though I know he wants to geek out on the more technical stuff later.
Yeah, we started, learned about Passive House 10 years ago. And as you can see from this slide, had kind of an evolution since then. Had to do the first one on our own account because there were no customers asking for this kind of thing. And I'll let Brandon dive a little bit more into the details on the particular project for today.
Absolutely. And with Sloan, it was great because, like we said, we started with his first house. It was a challenge to pack it into a tiny lot. It's called Park Passive. It ended up making like the New York Times. It ended up winning the AIA National Housing Award. It was quite a launch project, I think, for both of us heading into it. From there, we moved into View House 5, where we actually were working with another architecture firm as the Passive House consultant. Pax Futura is what we'll talk about today. That was started about 3 to 4 years ago. It's Seattle, so it takes you a while to get through an entitlement, not as long to build. And then obviously now it's built and complete and finished certification in March. And then we also did 320 Queen Anne, which Sloan is currently building for a client I'd worked with for years who hopefully has bought in and going to kind of continue down that road. Nope. So the location, if you don't know Seattle, it is in Southeast in Columbia City. It was a neighborhood that had seen neglect for years, but had the benefit of having light rail put through decade and a half ago. And it now connects the airport to downtown and the university. And so the introduction of light rail has really led to more kind of redevelopment in what was kind of smaller neighborhood center. The site itself is located in between light rail and the commercial core of Columbia City. And that led to some really good decisions from the very beginning. In Seattle, they removed the parking requirement. So from the beginning, the project was focused on bicycles and mass transit without a parking space on the site. The environment around, it's something we've really, started to fuss with as we've got deeper and deeper into Passive House. There's an existing large building to the south. Something that is unique because we're now doing work all over the country, but Seattle is much more like Canada compared to what most of us on the East Coast work on, meaning that it can get really a lot of sun in the summer from the northeast and northwest, and gains on the north side that you wouldn't when you're further south. The winter, you struggle with the fact that there is so little light. And I lived in Seattle better part of 2 decades. I only go there for the summer now because the winter, December, there's just very, very little natural light opportunities, and the sun gets incredibly low on the horizon. This is also a corner lot, so we were going to have the benefit of 3 right-of-ways with an alley on the north side, but it's also in a commercial zone. So we knew that there was a kind of the inevitable filling in of the parking lot that you can see just behind the house that was there in the diagram. Precedent, back to development. I joke this is the one where I made all my mistakes concurrent to doing Park Passive with Sloan. Around 2008, I bought a parking lot when the Sonics left Seattle and built a 7-story building. I call it Proto Passive. I hired the best green consultant I could, tried to figure out everything we could about systems, built an ideal wall assembly, put in triple glazing, followed everything, and then, as you can tell by the sign, blew it on mechanical as we have our whole house fans blowing all that precious conditioned air out our facade every few hours. But on that project, we really played with interior courtyards. It was a similar orientation, 2 streets and an alley. You're fighting to get light and air, and we did a whole series of buildings where we used an exterior circulation that has the benefit of creating through units. I think another thing that really kind of informed us was by the time we took on Pax Futura, we had done enough other passive house projects that we were beginning to kind of put together a systematic approach. And I've had the honor of presenting this a couple times with Monty and Lois Arena. I've also done it at other conferences, but we eventually developed a large commercial and multifamily class, like a series of different philosophies of how to approach a building. And this was right around the time we did Pax Futura, so we were able to take a lot of the ideas of like unit or floor by floor neighborhood or varying windows by facade in order to control gain. Early on in the design concept too, we ended up with a courtyard in the center, but very quickly kind of came up with this idea of series of grids and grids that respond to the facade that they're facing. So not to suffer from symmetriosis or whatever you want to call architects' love of absolute symmetry, we let each facade behave in a manner that was appropriate for its orientation. So that led us to kind of horizontal windows along the south with fixed glazing. The west was going to be our danger. So we moved to kind of a very playful, movable facade, knowing that there were times of the year we were going to want as much energy as we could get and other times where we don't want anything. And then the east and the north kind of doing what was appropriate for either the interior space or the future condition. The way the project works out, 44 feet across, 108 feet long. There's live-work lofts on the ground floor, a commercial space on the corner. The rest of the floor is actually kind of a laundry room, trash, bicycle storage, and then what actually became a really exquisite courtyard. Up on the second floor, we ended up with a kind of centralized hot water system. So that storage label is wrong, but when you're going through entitlement, you don't know it. A couple other unique things about the project. It is, despite being 5 stories, it's legally 4 stories. It also does not have an elevator. So despite being multifamily, everything above level 2 is exempt from ADA and fair housing. So that enabled us to have some kind of tighter units. But if you look at it, a lot of the things that you would normally see in a multifamily building that eat up space or eat up runnable area, elevators, parking, things like that, were actually not part of the program. And even the circulation doesn't count against FAR because it's exterior. As Monty mentioned, it is a CDU project by the Seattle definition. They're small efficiency dwelling units. There are kind of 1-bedroom units on the corner, but other than that, it's predominantly studios. It also, from the very beginning, had aggressive solar goals, and that did morph as the project moved along. And then the courtyard. Very, very little design opportunity on the outside, meaning we're built to 3 walls, but we wanted to create a really engaging vertical space within the center of the project that could be its core. This is how everybody comes and goes from the project. This is space outside that people experience every day. And in a building like this, yes, there's a little bit of amenity in, I'll call it the laundry room and the amenity room, but it was always meant to be a place where, despite being small, you would be comfortable. There could be multiple people within various parts of the space. Modeling, I think anybody who's heard me speak before, model early, model often. We actually did this project and diving through the records to prepare. We did it in Woofy Passive, we did it in Design PH, we did it in PHPP alone. Maybe not the most efficient way to go about it, but you do get lots and lots of information as you go through. And in looking at details, we really did kind of take this time to really analyze and improve our details. Not to bore you on foundations, but we have half a dozen, 8, 10 different options of just something as simple as how the footing hits the floor slab, hits the exterior wall. And we started with very traditional things like carrying insulation down, trying to insulate around the footing. But in the end, we ended up with something that was actually more efficient and as simple as could be, which is just insulating below the slab, putting a wedge against a curb, having the curb and the footing and the exterior wall come down, float the interior slab. I mean, as simple as could be, simple to build, saves a lot of messing around in the dirt, saves layers and excavation are on the side and minimizes insulation. From very early on, it was also planned as a SIP project. So, kind of the patterning and the way of the windows and the repetition was designed kind of around the idea that that was something that was going to be incorporated. Also, you can see kind of the windows and walls. We were really playing with what was the best way to get light and air into the building, but to keep it very simple, minimal modulation, no inside corners, no outside corners, except for what we needed for circulation. And then shading, from the very beginning, we were liked the idea of kind of trying to avoid air conditioning, even though you'll hear that kind of came back in, but also to have people understand where they live, something that they could interact with and something that could help them control their own environment. So we came up with the idea of Precedents of kind of these movable screens. We'd seen good examples in Europe. And part of the facade became, how do you actually have two screens, an operable panel, a place to stack the panels, and still create an interesting facade? So in working with Sloan, we kind of came up with an idea of these tracks with windows that shifted, blank opaque walls that shifted, and panels that could move on the outside. And at this point, I'll actually kick it to Sloan for this part.
That sounds great. Thanks, Brandon. So as you can see in the upper right corner, that's looking up at the south facade. So that's kind of an easy one to handle. We've got the sort of traditional fixed awning that casts a shadow over the glass during the summer months, but yet in the winter it allows the solar gains to come through. So that's easy. In the bottom right corner, as well as on the left side, in the bottom right corner, you can see that's the west facade. And you can see the panels that we ended up installing. And what they do is they slide in front of the windows, or you can move them away to the space on the side to store them when you don't want that shading or when you want to look out the window or whatever. And so it was very important to us. We needed to have some kind of exterior solution for shading the west solar gains in the summer. This is the primary facade of the building, and it's west facing, and there's tons of glass because of other constraints on the project. That was sort of where we had to put it. So it really made us need to come up with a great solution. We thought about other solutions. We thought about electric roller shades, and we determined that that was too complicated and too hard to maintain and operate over time, and that the controls were something that we probably couldn't figure out easily or without a lot of experts. So we decided to execute this system. And I have to say, initially, when Brandon and the architects start talking about things coming from Europe and there being these great systems, it makes me nervous because it's going to be very expensive. It's going to be in metric. We're not going to understand it and all that. And so what we realized is we didn't need their systems. We could just come up with our own. And so we ended up developing this system with Brandon and his team to use off-the-shelf hardware, stuff you can pick up at Home Depot, stuff that's been around for years, Husky hardware, rollers and tracks, very simple. We just left it unpainted, unfinished. It doesn't need any maintenance. We've had no issues with it. The only part that was custom were the frames. Like you can see on the left, we've got an aluminum frame that's welded, and we've attached the cedar slats to that. So overall, it worked out amazingly well for not very much money, and it was a very good, simple solution to the building.
And then actually I threw this in since we did the run through, Sloan, but we were talking during the run through about whether people actually use them or close them. So this was Google Street View, late July last summer. And I was shocked to see literally most people by noon had kind of shut off the west glazing.
That's funny. I was wondering if that was a staged shot because you can't even see any windows, but that's what it looks like.
Yeah, no, I go to Seattle for the summers, and I remember it was like it's been incredibly hot in Seattle year after year. So I took this as a sense that people actually understood how to use their unit. I mean, if you look at the top, 90% coverage, meaning they left their unit in the morning and they thought about what condition it would be if they left it fully open for the entire day.
Yeah, we've done a little bit of education for the tenants just so that they understand how the system works. Hey, it's summertime, it's getting hot next week. We just send them an email, say, close your shades, it works better, and it seems to be working.
Yeah. So the next thing we'll dive into is mechanical. And actually, I thought it's worth putting out there that one of the things that we've done on almost every passive house project in Seattle is put in for code alternates. And it's not that we're like perpetually violating the building code, but there's so many things in the code that are stacked against passive house, just built-in requirements because the code is developed by consensus. Normally, we don't do too many per project. You know, you pick your battles. But on this project, the alternate was actually for the eliminating exhaust and using the ERV for the kitchen exhaust, meaning the exhaust patterning, but then also to use the recirculation fan. And, you know, it's something that you kind of just have to do, but it was interesting. You know, we picked one per project. We try not to do a whole slew, and we try not to have it be something that the project's going to die on. But back to philosophy, we have been playing with unit by unit, neighborhood, or whole building mechanical. Anybody on this call has probably heard me say that I've actually often landed on, I'll call it neighborhood mechanical, just because I feel it's, at least at this day, the best current solution. Not saying there's not a better one out there. But I think Sloan, if you want to kind of cover, I will say we did work with Galen Stengel. We've worked with him on probably a dozen projects, and you know, dragging him from Virginia to Seattle or Pittsburgh has become quite common.
Yeah, we, as Brandon was saying, I really pushed the team to evaluate everything. Like, can we do a whole building HRV? What are the pros and cons, costs? How does it work? Could we do unit by unit HRVs? Does that make sense for such small studio apartment units? Or should we do sort of more of a hybrid or neighborhood approach? And so we actually looked at all three, came up with schematic designs for all of them, and pros and cons and cost analysis, and we ended up with this neighborhood approach. You know, we don't want to go inside everybody's apartment unit to pull a filter and to maintain, you know, 36 different HRVs, and plus we couldn't find the right solutions, and the whole building had some pros and cons as well. So we ended up with this neighborhood approach where we've got some Zender CA350s in a closet off of the corridor. It'll serve the apartments that are right above and the ones to the side, and we can access that closet whenever we want to pull filters and swap them out. So it ended up being the best solution for us. And we had a little bit of vertical mechanical duct work, which requires fire dampers in some limited circumstances. So we had that, but this ended up being the best solution for us.
Yeah, but I think in this case, it's a good execution of the vertical because it's only going one floor. So you're only hitting a set of fire dampers as you're moving through, but then you're hitting half the building with each. So you can see there's kind of like one on the north, one on the south, and then every other floor. So it became a really, really efficient way to kind of maximize those units. The other thing too is because these are small units, back to basic passive house, there's a supply zone, a transfer zone, and an exhaust zone. In some cases, our transfer zone is our kitchens. That's a little bit different than we've done in other projects, but really each unit is just balanced by one port that comes in and one port that exhausts.
Yeah, so talking to this slide here, you can see we also kind of realized, we talked about AC, like, well, you know, people are kind of starting to demand air conditioning in Seattle, the climate's changing and so forth, but air conditioning is just too expensive. There's no good air conditioning solution for 350 square foot apartments anyways. So we killed that, and then we realized, wait a second, we've got supply air coming into every unit. Maybe we can do like sort of a central heat pump, and we can deliver through the supplier. You can see on the diagram here, we can use the heat pump to go to a buffer tank, and we can deliver that. We can temper the supply air coming into the units. In the winter, we heat it. In the summer, we cool it. And there was, you know, concern about, well, tenants don't have control over this, and everyone wants to have individual control. Well, we already eliminated air conditioning. It wasn't going to be possible financially to do that on this project. So we're just saying we're tempering the air somewhat. We're not providing complete load for the cooling, but they're going to have a more comfortable unit than they otherwise would. So that's what this slide is about.
Well, I will definitely say, I think with the way that summers are going in the Northwest, the fact that we're having gigantic bonfires in the forest. You know, those in Seattle and Vancouver, it's been 3, 4, 5 years where there are just these periods where there's massive amounts of smoke, and it's hot and it's smoky and you don't want to open your windows. So I really viewed this as kind of a way that actually does lead to a more kind of bearable existence in your unit with the way that summers have been going in the Northwest.
Yeah, I think one thing that I kind of realized before we jump into the solar is that in coming to all these decisions, one thing that really stood out to me is that it's not an all or nothing proposition. You know, it's not like we're either having air conditioning or not. And we really kind of sort of broke through some of the norms and standards that people think about, like, well, if you have air conditioning, it has to be individually controlled. Or if you're going to have an HRV, it has to exclusively serve your unit only. And what if a tenant doesn't have control? And there were a lot of those kind of questions that could have driven us to either just do everything and blow the budget, or do nothing. And I think that as a team, we sort of came to realize that there were a lot of solutions that are hybrid like this that ended up making a lot more sense and being appropriate to this project. So that's kind of how we ended up there. And the same actually goes for the next slide, which is about solar. We had initially wanted to do PV on the roof, and we determined that if a 4-story building built to a passive house EUI, if you cover the whole roof in PV, you're going to be net zero on that project. The city of Seattle had some reasons why that was not going to be possible for us. And so we, by sizing the system down, we started to explore other options. And thinking about our domestic hot water, I wonder if we could do that with solar. So we looked into a system, we had it designed. As Brandon was mentioning earlier about Seattle in January, there's not so much sun. So they designed the system for solar to pick up all the domestic hot water. Well, that was going to cover the entire roof with these solar thermal tubes. And we decided, well, that doesn't make sense. Then we can never add any PV later or anything. So we asked them, cut the system size in half, cut it by 2/3, and tell us what the production will be. And the cut it by 2/3 solution was still going to give us like 70% production, because the system was being sized to a January week. And so that's why it was getting so huge. And so we ended up with a system that provides most of our solar hot water heating. We've got backup from a gas boiler they'll heat the tanks. And so that's how we ended up with a solar thermal system on this project.
Then finally, hate to say from the architecture side, details. I think we really were trying to make it kind of an exquisite place to live. I talked early on about just the need for, I'll just call it creative and interesting space within tight urban projects. I think from a development perspective, the same as Sloan, if your building amenity is like the limited amount of landscaping and circulation you have to figure out how to make it work and be enjoyable. So there's this tight courtyard in the middle. That's also our stormwater planter, but we have benches and some interesting seating around it. But then even one of the rails up above actually became a bench kind of up on the 2nd story. And we carried that kind of idea of the slats and the horizontals all the way kind of through the project, even to the point of like kind of framing in the exterior stairs. The interiors of the units, they have to work. It's tight. The kitchens are small. It is a 3/4 kitchen compared to what you might get at a normal apartment. You really have one window per unit, right? It's not like there's multiple rooms or other places you can go. So the level of finish, the way that it was laid out, the integration of kind of the HVAC in, even providing there's a ceramic electric heaters that will temper it beyond what the ERV will, barn doors to save space. And really kind of the court at night becomes just a beautiful place to actually be. And I think the way that the Passive House project feels, I think there, as much as it's about the quality of the environment you're going to have, I think it's lost if we don't carry through within the quality of the design. And so that is it. I think at this point we'll pass it back and take
Just
questions.
get the questions. Yeah, sorry, there's lots. There's about 5 that just popped in here at the end. Let me go back up. Ray Clemens has an easy one to get started with.
Yeah, here's an easy one. Your windrows on your site analysis. I've been looking for something that looks that nice for a long time and can't find it. What'd you do?
So I am not the one who actually got the wind for that, but I know they found the prevailing winds within Seattle. They were able to find speed and direction by season, but unfortunately the graphic was generated custom for design review. Seattle has an incredibly intensive design review process, but I can dig back through our files and see if I can find it. I know that for a lot of our projects, we were able to get pretty reliable wind data, at least within that market.
Great,
And actually,
thanks.
the prevailing winds in Seattle, they're not always what you think. In the summer, they actually often can come from the mountains, as those who are smelling the smoke are aware. And anybody who's lived in Seattle knows come winter, they just come railing out of the southwest. Like any building that's got south or west facades, that's going to be where the rain goes. So one of the benefits of Pax Futura, east-facing courtyard, it's going to stay dry.
Very cool. And Ray, you can see in the chat, there's Tom giving an idea there with the windrows. I'm sure hopefully more will give you some hints in there. Next, we're off to Julie. Joe, I see your hand is raised. I'll add you to the queue. We're like 20 deep, so we'll get to you.
Yeah. Which Julie?
Good question. Sorry, Julie Blazik.
Brandon, question many of us have. How did you get the funding for your very first project, the Precedent?
Sorry, say that again? Oh, the funding for my own.
Yeah.
So we actually partnered with a family trust who we had, not that I'm related to, but one that we've been doing architecture and development. They actually came to us. My wife and I were looking for an 8-unit apartment site. And they brought me like 60 sites saying, which one should we buy? And they found this one right next to the Space Needle, way more than I would ever look for. And I said, yep, that's the property you should buy. And Nina, who I had been working with for several years, came back to me and said, if you believe that, put your money where your mouth is. And I was like, as long as we get design control, great. So my wife and I came in as minority partners. So we had some cash, some sweat equity, actually a lot of sweat equity through design fees, and ended up 50% partners in the building. And then we actually used a loan product called a 221D4, which is a federally guaranteed housing loan, which has a fairly low equity requirement that if your land is pretty expensive, can get down to land. So I hate to say we were looking for an 8-unit project and ended up in a 45. It's just as much work to do a 45 unit as an 8. So, you know, after that, we were able to kind of go on and do different things. And actually at this point, we no longer are entering in partnerships. We're just doing our own stuff. But if you can find an aligned client, like particularly one who you already have a relationship and trust, for us, that got us in way deeper in development, way earlier in our careers than we would have otherwise. And we've continued to own and operate that building. So it's been great to get feedback data. But yeah, I think everybody struggles with that. Like, how do you move from architecture to development? I will give warning, if you're on the architecture side and you move to development, you'll struggle with how to keep the architecture firm.
Awesome, thank you.
Brandon, you mentioned lending. I just have to insert this little tidbit. Yep. When we were first going for construction financing on this project, we'd been doing other green projects before, and I told the lender, yeah, this is passive house. It's, you know, like the other green projects we do, not thinking really anything of it. When it got to executive loan committee, somebody said, oh, it's a passive house project. And someone in the room said, oh, isn't that those houses from the 70s with a box of rocks in the basement to heat the house? And so once that statement had been uttered, that project was not getting financed by that bank. Wow. So it turned into a kind of a disaster, because I had to go switch banks at the last minute. Ended up getting the deal done. But let's just come full circle to 2020. It's March, and you might have noticed that it was announced, I think Monty said we finally got our certification in March of this year. Why did we wait so long? I guess kind of just lazy and didn't do the paperwork and didn't finish on the certification. But what happened was we were refinancing, and Fannie Mae has a program where you can use green credit to get a couple bump on your basis points. So we said, sure, oh yeah, we're passive house, great. So it comes down to the wire, and the underwriter says, yeah, you're just still missing two last little things. One is your passive house certification. And I'm like, we actually don't even have that. Okay, we got to get that. So, you know, going back to a bank rejecting us for passive house back 3-4 years ago, to Fannie Mae, the US federal government-backed lending institution, demanding that we show them the passive house certificate before they'll close the loan.
Well,
And this is like, COVID is closing in. I'm like, we got to get this thing certified. So now Fannie Mae announced that this was their first passive house loan they've ever done, and they're excited about it, and they want to make a case study about it and get more passive houses into their program.
yeah. Well, I will say what was going to get you there, Sloan, is actually your insurance, your mortgage insurance premium is my bet. Because right now it's 15 basis points if you are passive house, FIAS, PHI, whatever you want to call it. I think LEED Gold, LEED Platinum fall for that same credit. Or it's 45 basis points if you don't actually complete the certification. So, you know, do you want to pay 3 times as much on your mortgage insurance? And your mortgage insurance is, you know, it's the equivalent of an interest rate difference. So yeah, it's not little bits around the edges. It's real money every month when you're running the building. So absolutely. And we found the same thing from our bank. We've been working with M&T, which has a Seattle presence and an East Coast presence. They're absolutely aware of passive house. They view it as, I mean, I hate to say equal from an underwriting perspective to LEED, but they will take it. You will get your insurance credits. It can make it through underwriting. You are no longer kind of fighting uphill on that side in the federal insured loan programs.
Great stuff and great stories. We'll just go back to the questions. Joe, you had your hand up and you were going to put the back of the queue, but luckily you had your question in sooner. So Joe, ask away.
Yeah, hey guys. So yeah, I am a passive healthy. So in terms of trying to identify yourself, that's my approach to everything we do. I didn't realize that the rocks in my basement could qualify me to make my home passive house. So I will definitely be filing my paperwork next week. So I love your aesthetics. That's great whenever you guys present something and it's just beautiful. So I commend you on carrying all that theme through that and very economical. My question for you goes back to before elevators, that first floor units were cheaper than the higher units. And I wanted to find out, did you apply anything similar to that, or did you just make people who wanted to walk up and get their healthy units in pay the same price or have the same content for that? So is it cheaper to be on the first floor or not?
You know, it's kind of funny when we were during leasing, we had good lease up on the first floor. We had good lease up on the 4th floor because it has views of downtown. But they were saying, we're just having trouble leasing the 3rd floor because you got to walk fairly far up, but it's not quite as good of views as from the 4th floor. So I think there's a slight pricing difference, you know, just based on sort of market leasing feedback, but it was more about the views. And I think there was some holdback to the walking up all 4 floors.
Yeah, even for delivery, you have to go downstairs to get that stuff. So it does have its limitations. So
yeah, right.
Well, I think 4 stories is probably about as far as you want to push it. You know, I mean, even at the 4-story level, move in, move out, it's a long flight with a mattress or a sofa. But I think for a smaller project, you know, an elevator is a $200,000 item by the time you get it in and get everything you need to do. From a square footage standpoint, it's 100 square feet per floor. That's a unit when you're dealing with a project like the scale of Pax Futura.
Yeah, that was an initial strategic decision. We looked at even one city program that would have allowed us an extra bump in floor, and we could have gone up another 10 feet, but which would have triggered a requirement for an elevator. And we thought we could do that. We'd get an extra floor, but we'd have to do an elevator, and there's a bunch of cost there. And then would we then want to do a basement too? And we just decided to keep it simple. We finally found a flat site in Seattle, and so we're like, let's just use this flat site and just build a building right on the ground and keep it as cheap as possible so we can focus more on the envelope and the passive house elements.
follow-up question is, are the first floor ADA compliant, or do they have, okay, you did that for the first floor, okay.
Yeah, I'll take that another step. The commercial space is ADA compliant. The 2 ADA units are on the ground floor. The amenity is on the ground floor, and then 2 live work, which actually have ADA compliant restrooms. So yeah, the ground floor is fully covered and fully designed for that. And then the second you go up the stairs, the doors are smaller, the plates are tighter, and I think it works.
Great questions, Joe, and maybe
Thank you.
we'll save the lift hook conversation to the after hour. Sorry, who did we have next? We had Tom Phillips had a bunch of questions, but this one's about the shading dynamics.
Yeah, I think I wanted to ask about rents. It's a really beautiful, well thought out project. Congratulations. Thanks for the presentation. I was wondering what the rents are compared to, market rate and affordable housing, because it looks like it would go for a premium. And then I have a little trickier question about outdoor air intakes, which I can get to if you want.
Yeah, I guess I can touch on the rents question. It does go for a little bit of a premium. I think in that area, it's one of the newer buildings. It's well designed. It's a great looking building. I think we get a little premium on the passive house features, especially when we send out the notice to the tenants about our filtration when we're having the wildfire smoke. I think that's very appreciated by the tenants. But it's really hard to say whether we're getting more rents because there's not really anything exactly like it right nearby. So I'd like to say definitely we're getting more rents, but there's no way to prove that really. It's just sort of anecdotally. That's all.
Thanks. The outdoor air question I had was about inlet location and avoiding contamination and security and whatnot. Because I've raised the issue for the update for the California energy standards. And years ago when I looked into it, I remember Seattle had a requirement for elevating outdoor air intakes, at least for office buildings, I think. But for multifamily, it would make sense too, yeah. I think. So just wondering if you knew anything about that.
The main Seattle requirement, as far as I understand it, is just they have to be 10 feet above ground for intake and exhaust, which on commercial sites in the city actually tends to affect garage exhaust more than mechanical systems. So like if you have a below grade parking garage that's blowing out carbon dioxide and vehicle fumes, that actually has to be 10 feet above any adjacent grade, and then any intakes have to be away from the exhaust. We didn't have that. So most of our kind of intakes and exhausts are just up above. They're where the ERVs are, up at kind of level 2 through level 4. I guess so there's a mezzanine one, which is right below level 2.
And you don't have much traffic near there?
Well, I hate to say it's going through an HRV. So yes, there's traffic. It's urban air. There's fires. There's particulates. I think the best we can say is that it actually goes through the filter before it actually gets supplied to the unit. There is no place like when there's fires that you can get fresh air. There's particulates everywhere. So
yeah, I think
the most important thing is that we actually deal with the air when we take it in prior to running it into the units. And I think in California, that's probably the most important thing there too. If you move
like at least 4 stories, some are saying 600 meters. So New York City has some requirements or recommendations. Yeah. Anyway.
I'm going to share a couple of happy hour and other event announcements for next week. But first, I want to thank our sponsors who make all of our work possible. So our founding sponsors are Baxt Ingui Architects, Mitsubishi Electric Train HVAC US, RDH Building Science, StoCorp, and Zola Windows. Our stakeholder partner is NYSERDA, or the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. And our patron sponsors are Morrison Hershfield, 475 High Performance Building Supply, and Partel. So thank you to our sponsors for making this happen. Next, Wednesday, we have James Gepner up. Many of you know James Gepner from his work with Erase 40 and his understanding of social psychology and market transformation. He is now at NYSERDA, which is very exciting. He's with the Retrofit New York program, and he's going to be presenting about market transformation toward large-scale retrofit in the state, and with lessons applicable to the rest of us and the rest of the world. So please check that out on Wednesday. And then the next day, on Thursday, we have a special roundtable that's very topical that Graham Irwin is going to be the moderator for. And this is Passive House on the Front Lines, Wildfire Smoke, and Indoor Air Quality. And this presentation will focus and will feature a roundtable or round robin of presentations by homeowners talking about their own passive house dwellings and how they have been responding to wildfire smoke and adding filtration, and what has been working and what hasn't been working. And we'll have experts on indoor air quality join us for that call. So it should be really interesting to look at. You know, we all know that passive house is such an important first step toward dealing with AQI numbers of up north of 600 now on the West Coast and in Australia and elsewhere. So what else do we need to do to deal with these intense events? And we'll have a special guest from Australia to join us as well. Thanks.
Hey, great. Thank you, Sloan. Thank you, Brandon. Sliding here in the sun. Great presentation, wonderful building. I love the exterior shading. It's one of the core patterns in pattern language from Passive House is looking at different patterns of exterior shading. Thanks, everybody. I have to run, but I'm going to turn it back in capable hands for you all to continue in the after hours. See you next week.